I'm going to call to order this first meeting of the Subcommittee on the Constitution and welcome my colleagues, most especially the ranking member on the subcommittee, Senator Cruz. Thank you so much for your cooperation in scheduling this first hearing, and I look forward to this kind of collaborative effort going forward. And I know we've been joined by Senator Grassley, the ranking member of the committee. I'm going to turn to you after Senator Cruz, and I think we may be joined by Senator Durbin for some opening remarks as well. Last month, the Judiciary Committee held a very important hearing, as my colleagues know, on Constitution and common sense steps to reduce the epidemic of gun violence in this country that has recently claimed so many lives in Atlanta, Boulder, Indianapolis, and elsewhere. Gun violence is a real problem. We all know it. But there are also real solutions. And I believe strongly and passionately that we have a path to put some of those solutions into law during this session, and I believe we can with bipartisan cooperation. I'm not naive. I don't believe that all gun violence prevention proposals will be adopted by unanimous consent, but I hope this afternoon at least we can focus on one topic where there does appear to be at least some measure of common ground. Extreme risk orders, also known as risk warrants, that's the name in Connecticut we've adopted, or red flag laws. Whatever you call them, we know they save lives. We know that red flag extreme risk orders save lives. They are practical and proven tools that allow law enforcement under some statutes and others, including family members, to keep guns out of the hands of individuals who possess and pose a danger to themselves or others. In other words, separate people from guns when they are in crisis. Firearms make dangerous decisions far more deadly and irreversible. Just to give you one example, among commonly used methods of self-harm, firearms are by far the most lethal. For people who seek to take their own lives, the fatality rate is approximately 85% with a firearm. It is 5% by any other method. Firearms are used in less than 6% of suicide attempts, but they account for more than half of the suicide deaths. In 1999, my home state of Connecticut became the first in the nation to enact an extreme risk order. We call it a risk warrant. Studies have shown that in the first 14 years of Connecticut's law, for every 10 to 20 risk warrants issued, at least one suicide was prevented. In addition, many of those who tried to take their own lives were compelled or persuaded to seek help, professional help, that made a real difference in their lives. That isn't some sort of abstract statistic. States across the country have used extreme risk or red flag statutes as critical suicide prevention tools. In Portland, Oregon, law enforcement was able to remove 10 firearms and bar future firearms purchases after a man called 911 and threatened to kill himself and his 3-year-old son with a gun because he was frustrated that he was not able to make a child support payment. The same is true probably in all of your states. I know you have heard these stories. I'm not going to recount more, but I will put my full statement in the record. These laws don't just prevent suicide. They've also been used to stop mass shootings, homicide, terrorist threats, and hate crime. Authorities in Florida used the state's extreme risk order law to remove an AR-15 from a high school student who had said he would kill himself and his ex-girlfriend if they didn't get back together, if she didn't get back together with him. As my colleague, Senator Graham, has pointed out, the Parkland shooting resulted after the killer in that instance practically put an ad in the phone book saying he was going to shoot people, but authorities there couldn't stop him for lack of a red flag statute. After it happened, they adopted one in Florida. These laws are also bipartisan among the American public, in state legislatures, and in Congress. In fact, polling has found that 84% of Americans, including 78% of Republicans, support red flag laws. There are now 20 jurisdictions, blue states and red states, with these critical tools in place. And others are on their way to passing and implementing the laws. President Biden has announced that the Justice Department will soon publish model legislation for states that will help them to adopt these statutes. And I've worked closely with not only my colleague, Senator Graham, who's been very constructive, but also Senator Feinstein, Senators Rubio and Scott have introduced their own bill, and I look forward to making progress. Let me just touch 2 points in conclusion. First, Indianapolis. The tragic events in Indianapolis show just how crucial effective implementation and enforcement is to the success of these efforts. Indiana has a strong red flag law named in honor of a police officer who was killed in the line of duty in a situation that might have been prevented had a red flag been in place at that time. Earlier this month, as we all know, a shooter killed 8 people at a FedEx warehouse in Indianapolis. Several months prior, police had taken a shotgun from him after his mother reported that he might try to commit suicide by cop. Law enforcement knew he was dangerous. Prosecutors just didn't use Indiana's red flag law to bar that individual from purchasing new guns, and he did, in fact, purchase 2 semi-automatic rifles in the months that followed, which he used in that massacre. Some have said that Indianapolis shows red flag laws don't work. They ought to be scrapped. I think that point is ridiculous. There are 6 million car accidents in the United States every year. That doesn't mean we throw out seatbelt requirements or speed limits. We insist on more effective enforcement of those laws that might have prevented those accidents or crashes or deaths. What the preventable loss of life in Indianapolis does prove is that even in jurisdictions where these laws exist, effective implementation is critical. We will hear today from witnesses who will tell us how federal grants would support training for prosecutors and others to enhance those states' development and effective use and enforcement. All of us who've been in law enforcement know laws are dead letter unless they are implemented and enforced effectively, and our proposals on red flag statutes are designed to provide the resources, the training, procedures, other kinds of basic nuts and bolts steps that are important here. Due process. To those critics who raise the specter of due process concerns, let me just say, extreme risk orders provide robust due process protections that comport with both the Constitution and the Supreme Court precedent governing due process considerations, and that is my goal here and in whatever we do, formulating and passing red flag statutes, to provide models and require that those grants and resources provided to states are conditioned on due process protections. These orders are temporary. They're used only by judges. The judges have to take evidence. The determinations are based on those evidence. The evidence is submitted under penalty of perjury. And when a temporary order is issued, but before it becomes permanent, the individual subject to it is provided with notice and an opportunity to both challenge the evidence against them and present evidence of their own. And once the order expires, the individual subject to it must have a firearm returned to them, so long as they are not otherwise prohibited from having it. So I think we are in an era that feels very different about gun violence. I'm hoping that we can reach bipartisan consensus. Gun violence isn't inevitable. Extreme risk order laws, red flag statutes prove it. And I, again, welcome my colleagues this afternoon and hope that we will indeed make progress. Thank you to all of my colleagues. I turn to Senator Grassley. I understand he would like to be recognized because of time constraints, and I'm happy to do so.
As ranking member of the full committee,